CEOs and sales folks to build repeatable processes in their business. So that's what I do. So today, Jim and I are going to talk about mission, company mission and employee engagement, and specifically the role of the manager in seeing that mission accomplished in the business and employee engagement. Now, Jim, I don't know what it's been like for you or maybe what you hear from your clients, but when I was in the corporate world, in my last, we'll call it assignment, I guess, in the corporate world, I was with a large multinational chemical company. We had 46,000 employees, a very well-regarded company. We were number one or number two in every market we served worldwide. And employee engagement and mission was very, very often talked about and very high and very visible on the radar screen. We spent significant sums of money to accomplish those things. And interestingly, is my background being a kind of a turnaround guy for a long time, even though that was a very large scale company with that many employees, it doesn't matter. I mean, it applies whether you're a 3-person company or a 46,000 person company. Vision, mission, values, and how you get that implemented in your company and through the culture of your company is critically important, right? So I don't know how familiar you are with that term engagement or what that means to you, or mission. But I want to start with a question, if it's okay, Jim. Can I throw it?
Absolutely.
A question? Let me see if I can make this happen here. So in the chat box, and this is important. So use the chat box today. If you have comments or you have questions, we'll try to take them on the fly if we can. If not, we'll certainly get you the answer offline. And this is being recorded as well. So in the chat box, here's my question for you. Who is responsible for employee engagement? And I'll expand that a little bit. So in an organization, in a company, who's responsible for engagement, and who's responsible to see that the mission and the vision of the company are well distributed through the organization? Whose responsibility is it? Go ahead and put that in the chat box if you would. Mm-hmm. And Jim, since I am a relatively low C in behavioral style, can you manage the chat box? That's normally Tim's responsibility.
I know. I will manage the chat box. So Michael Norton starts at the top. Steve Phones, leadership. Keep them coming.
Yep, keep them coming.
This is an interesting one, John, because we talked about this, and I think people often get it wrong. William Arnone, CEO primarily, and then all staff. Team lead supervisors, top down, but everyone overall. Everyone, C-level, CEO.
Okay.
We've got a nice mix of answers here. I would say everyone, but the top has a hand in it as the culture is filtered throughout.
Okay, well, that's great. And here's what I will tell you this. So I'll use an example. When I was in this last corporate assignment, we had distributors around the world, and focusing primarily, let's say, on North America. I remember I would go to some, and you'd visit different locations of the same company, and it was like you were going to a totally different organization. And one very distinctly, I remember going to, I'll even say their name, called Piedmont Plastics out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Had 73 locations in the US and Canada. And it was like going to McDonald's when they were really good, quite a number of years ago now, where everything was the same. Everybody knew the mission, everybody knew the vision, everybody knew the values, everybody could talk about the BHAG. Extra points if you know what a BHAG is, throw that in the chat box. I'll share that with you if you don't know what the BHAG is. Everybody knew what that was, and it was really remarkable on how they did it. But here's the answer, and I think it sounds like some of you got it. You're responsible. Now, when I say you are responsible, what I mean by that is it doesn't matter what role you are in the company, and I think it was said a few times. whether you're the CEO or you are the person responsible for shutting the lights out at the end of the day, leaving the building or the plant or the shop or whatever, you are responsible. It is not a one-person deal. The CEO, what I think where we get a little bit confused, maybe, in some companies, they think that, and maybe you've experienced this in your own organization, the CEO sets this vision or this mission, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong there. First of all, maybe the employees have not been enlisted in figuring out maybe what that should be, the mission. Maybe it's not the reason why we're making changes or doing what we're doing is not really communicated. But we think, okay, let's make this cool mission statement, some great words on a paper or on the wall, and that's where it stops. And that's not the case. I mean, regardless whether you're the CEO on this call, or you're a salesperson, a marketing person, an operations person, a manager, whatever your level or area of responsibility, you are responsible. Because here's what we know, that it is everybody's responsibility. The CEO, the leadership team, managers, and the employee. Now, today we're focusing primarily on managers, right? Because that's what we said when we set this out. We're going to focus on managers, but it is everybody's responsibility. The CEO kind of sets that. If the CEO does not participate and is not actively involved in helping people understand the vision and the mission, it doesn't work. Now, the leadership team has a slightly different role, right? They're involved also oftentimes in the informing of that, and making sure that it's clear and there's tactics behind the strategy, whatever we're doing as a company. But then the managers have a very specific role, and we'll talk about that. Jim, anything? And I see a couple things pop in the chat box. Anything I need to pay attention to?
Yeah. There's Leo has a great question, and I think if we pause for a second on CEO and leadership team, we can break this down a little bit. Leo says a lot of companies have worked with silos filter in. So what's the best way to work around those as a manager of a single division?
Sure. Do you want to talk about that? I'm happy to talk about that. I mean, siloing is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to it potentially speaks to some blind spots, right? Often we'll see the CEO, or maybe it was even a previous CEO, sets the vision, the mission is declared, it goes up on a wall or in a binder somewhere, and we then proceed to get into the weeds. And as you and I were discussing, there's a great quote out there, and I was not able to find it. I am going to find it though. There's a great quote out there from a CEO who said, my job is simple. I simply walk around and recite the company mission 1,000 times per day, right? So that everybody is clear on what we are doing. And that was said somewhat, facetiously, but it's true, right? The CEO should be articulating that mission frequently. It's not a one and done and let's step away from it. So I think sometimes companies, not all companies, but some companies, there's a blind spot there. It's treat it as an event and we don't go back to it until sometime later, and that's potentially a mistake. So I'll toss it over to you to speak more specifically about silos and the leadership team and how that all plays.
Yeah, and I have to say, I would really challenge that CEO that said my job is to walk around and recite that. I mean, I think that's a very, very small part of it, because I think anybody that's been around for any length of time, you have somebody articulating a mission or a vision. If you don't understand it, why we're doing it, or how we're going to do it, a lot of people here are obviously Sandler people, and behavioral styles. And I experienced this myself in the corporate world. I would have a fantastic meeting. I thought it went great. A lot of people smiling, shaking their heads. I'd get a knock on my door by my high C behavioral style team partner. And she'd say, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" She said, "Well, you left half the people or some percentage of the people behind." And I would furrow my brow and say, "Why? It went great." She said, "No, you didn't explain how we were going to do it, or really maybe why we were doing it." So it goes way beyond just the what are we going to do, but that's a whole nother story. There's a lot of ways that this thing can get off track, or else we wouldn't spend a lot of money on it. But silo mentality, Leo, can happen for a lot of different reasons. And I think it depends on the structure of an organization. But I think I just had this conversation when I had a coaching session 2 days ago with a client of mine. And he said, well, don't I have to wait for the company to change? And I said, no, you don't, because if you wait for the company to change, oftentimes it will never happen. You have to be the change that you want to see. So I would say the best way to work around it is communicate and reach across to different departments where it's working well. Silo mentality happens a lot of times because people are protecting turf. Can be a lot of reasons why, Leo, but generally cross communication in an organization helps with silo mentality. And we can talk more about that, or I can take that offline, but a lot of times it depends how to deal with it, depends on why it exists. So here's what I would say. So the CEO, as I said before, without participation support, the chances of the mission getting deeply embedded in the company, it doesn't work.
So like everything, it's got to start at the top, right?
Oh yeah, and I think Michael said that, right? Of course, it starts at the top. But I think the thing we really want to understand here is that it is not just at the top. It's everybody's responsibility. The leadership team, if they really want to get alignment, when we say global, we mean global, whether it's a small team, a big team, or geographically global. If the leadership team doesn't do a good job, then the mission and the values and vision are disconnected and they're uneven. And in this company that I always think about, Piedmont Plastics, it was remarkable how well all the mission, vision, values, and the BHAG. Did somebody get BHAG in the chat box, Jim?
Yes, a couple people
big,
did.
hairy, audacious goal. They knew what that was.
Michael Norton, Shana Rougeau. Yep, they got it.
So, and not easy to do, but remarkable. Now, what we're talking about, right? Managers, right? If you're a manager, you have a role, right? And if you don't do your job, or we don't get managers involved, if you're a manager and you're working for the leadership team, or you report to the CEO, the managers are kind of the foot soldiers, right? To get out there and implement, to make sure that we get the strategy and the tactics done, right? And they play a big role in this. And then, of course, employees have to be engaged. Without employees being engaged and being involved, it's not going to happen, because you just can't execute.
Right.
So, if you had to look at this, and we wouldn't, right? And you say, okay, well, which of these could you do without? And the answer is, if you really want to be a high performing organization, and you have a mission that you actually want it to come to fruition and not to be words on a paper, you need full participation across the team, right? So here's a question for you in your organization. So if we go back and we look at all these things, right? CEO participation, leadership team, manager buy-in, employees being well engaged. My question to you is, are you experience a disconnect in your company? So if you look at it in your organization, and unless you think you have 100% engagement or mission is really well distributed, are you experiencing a disconnect in your company? Put in the chat box, is it unclear at the CEO level? Is the leadership team not cascading it down? Do you feel that the managers aren't engaged? And maybe you don't have a disconnect, but if you have a disconnect, where is it? I'd be curious to know.
It's interesting, John, that you bring up, the disconnect. Sometimes I see it where, leadership fully understands it, but the disconnect is in the communication down below or down beyond the management level. So the people actually doing the work to carry out the mission don't have as clear of an understanding as the leadership team. And sometimes there are, blind spots from that perspective. Heather says, not much of a disconnect. I'm sure at different times there are, but our company at all levels does a very good job of following mission and core values. So that's great. That's great to hear.
Yeah, that's terrific. And, and the reality is it's not typical. I mean, as much as I think, we spent a lot of money on our employees because employees are the most valuable resource, as far as I'm concerned, in any organization. And we spent money on education, training, things to make people more comfortable in the workplace. And even at that, to get a high level of engagement beyond maybe 68, 70% was very difficult. So disconnects can happen for a lot of different reasons, and they can happen in different levels in the organization. And, I know for me, where I had struggles, I thought I was doing a really good job of communicating vision and mission. But I was communicating in a way I think that made sense to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever experienced that, or anybody's ever experienced it on this call, where it makes perfect sense to you and somebody looks at you kind of cross-eyed, like, what are you talking about? I don't understand it. And then we're thinking, well, how do you not understand it, right? So we have to understand that the people communicate differently.
Two great things in chat here, John. Michael Norton says, disconnect could be between mission and vision when not tied to values. Do you think that when the values of the organization are lived out by the leadership and management teams, that engagement increases?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think, because again, and this is a big deal. I mean, so one of my clients is a large healthcare company, and you walk into their lobby, and they've got the mission is on the wall in very big letters, very bright, and you would think, oh, that's pretty cool. But it comes nowhere close to stopping there. When I first went there and I saw that, I thought, okay, it's not going to be one of these companies where, okay, look at these great words we have. I mean, they live it. I mean, the CEO and the president, they live out those values. Because I always tell people in organizational excellence, for example, when we talk about values, or we're selecting values, I said, be careful what you select, because you have to live it. You can't say that all employees are treated with respect, that, we value integrity and all those things, and then not display that. Fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair. Can you do me a favor, John? Can you go back to the summary slide? Because I think this question, and then we've got a good one in here from Steve. I think this question really speaks to the how, right? Which is what this whole series is about, is how do we do this? And if we look in organizations, because a couple different people have commented on the disconnect, right? This is your roadmap for your communication from the CEO to the leadership team. If there's not two-way understanding there, there's a disconnect. From the leadership team to the management level, depending on the size of the organization, right? You've got to adjust for the size of your organization, but leadership to management team, if there's not two-way communication, we're in trouble. And then management team to employees. And then you've got the other cross communication, because, CEOs, a lot of organizations should probably be visible, right? And that's our opportunity to discuss. Now, if we talk about the siloed challenges, right? If I'm a manager in a silo and I'm feeling that disconnect, I probably should take the time, the effort, the energy to reach out to John, for example, and say, John, we got to communicate. We've got a disconnect here. How do we help our people? How do we help move this mission forward? So I think that speaks to the how.
And that two-way communication, I mean, here's the thing, a very simple question, and we won't do it in the chat, and you don't always get the right answer here, is when you deliver a message, who's responsible for the person understanding it? And the answer is we are. I mean, it's not somebody else's job to understand us. It's our job to make ourselves understood within the parameters of the reasonable man standard. But, without manager buy-in, right, you're not going to have people, partners, or these foot soldiers, that are going to make everyone aware of the mission and having delivered it at that level. So it's critically important, if you are a manager, that you understand, what is it we're trying to accomplish as an organization. So you have to make sure that you fully understand the mission and the vision of the organization, because if you don't know that well and you can't live that out every day, it's going to be very, very difficult to make everyone else aware of what that is. Fair
I
statement.
want to pause on that for a second, because I think that's an important point. As somebody who's a manager and you've got mission and vision that's set, if you cannot buy into that, you're at a crossroads there that you've got to reconcile. Otherwise, you're not being effective to the people that you report up and down to. Right? Do you think that's fair, John? I think that's a crossroads that you've got to figure that one out immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And buy-in doesn't mean complete agreement. I mean, I know in my world, there were things I agreed with, some things not so much. But again, at the end of the day, once we decide the destination, it's our job to make sure that we get there. And the manager has a huge role in that, to make sure this happens. And so you've got to think about your own buy-in. And again, buy-in isn't complete agreement, but do you buy in that, we're directionally correct here, and then your role. So here's a question I'd like to ask in just the last 5 minutes we have here is, if you're at any level, but we're talking today mainly about managers, what are you doing to proactively, I don't mean passively, but proactively move the company mission forward and build engagement? So if you would agree that it is everyone's job and everyone's responsibility, what are you doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to see that, to ensure that company vision and that company mission moves forward and you build engagement? What are you doing? Mm-hmm. I'd be curious to see comments, because I know we got a lot of rock stars.
And you're asking for tactics, right? Something tactical that you're actually doing.
Oh, sure. I mean, I have thoughts about it, which I'll share in the next slide of a few things. But I mean, again, think about it, right? It's not enough to say, oh yeah, I'm responsible. Well, responsible for what? What do I do? So we have a lot of smart people on this call. And so in your organization, what are you doing? Right? We've all said, I agree, it's important, but what are we doing?
Yeah, got a good one here from James Blandy. I'll read it. James says, anything worth doing is worth measuring, correct? So leading and lagging indicators should be deployed to measure the success of any BHAG, for example. Mini goals that help achieve the overall BHAG are also important, because each department/silo plays a role. Let's take into consideration between leading and lagging indicators. What is the leverage to make an impact in the overall BHAG? Gamification is probably one of the better ways to enact adoption and then drive engagement. So I love that. Gamification. How can we make this fun, enjoyable, competitive, whatever your culture is, but how can we make this fun at the end of the day? I mean, I go to that, the high in me speaks to that, but.
Sure. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a slog. I mean, it's like people get freaked out about accountability, right?
Right.
It's not a gotcha exercise. It's not a bad thing. I mean, accountability is a good thing. And the fact that we do these things and we have measurables, it only makes sense. Anything worthwhile doing is worth measuring. Now, from my perspective, I'll just share a couple of very easy things with you that, we have a way, I think, of human beings of overcomplicating things sometimes. And we talk about this in a very large global group. We did this in Berlin in, I think it was 2010. We called a global growth conference with 100 people. And very simply, it was things to be a champion. You have to be that champion. You have to be that person out there beating the drum. leading the charge, so to speak. When I say the foot soldier, it's not the drill sergeant, drop and give me 20. It's being the champion, right? It's engaging people. It's being a motivator, right? Helping people see the benefit, what's in it for them. I know Michael would pick that out, right? A very simple thing to remember, and again, I think common sense isn't always common practice, that people need to know that who they are and what they do matters. If people know what they do and who they are matters, engagement goes way up and the chance they go an extra mile is much higher. And when I say facilitator, it means feedback, two-way feedback. You talk about the gym, right? Managers are going to get feedback from employees and they facilitate discussion, right? A communicator, make sure that people are talking, make sure they understand, make sure that the message and the communication is clear and people are understanding, okay? And lastly, in a broad sense, again, beginning with the end in mind, is be a difference maker. Be a difference maker in your organization. Doesn't matter the role. I'm very fortunate. I worked for a great CEO, and he would say, his name is John Rolando. He's actually retiring this year, and he would say, "My job is no different than yours, or more important, or no more important than yours. It's just different." So be a difference maker in your organization, regardless of your level and your role, area of responsibility. Do these things and be a difference maker in the organization. Don't wait for somebody else to do it.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. A lot of great comments in chat. So if you haven't looked at the chat, take a look at the comments there. Paul just wrote, "We have daily, weekly meetings and have managed to get teams working together on the same common goal. Next step is to break up silos. Operations uses KPIs, management by objectives, etc." So very nice, very nice. So do me a favor, and John, I think you had asked this too. We're right at 1 o'clock. We promised you 30 minutes. We're just about there. Put one takeaway as we're getting ready to wrap this up. What's one takeaway that you got out of today? Obviously, we want this to be very tactical. We want you to walk away with one thing that you can take and use. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. Our email addresses are there. Jim, John, if you're one of Tim Barry's clients or you're in Tim's area, his email address is there. We are always here to help. If you're not one of our clients and you're curious, it won't always be a sales pitch from us, but we certainly want to pay it forward and help you out in any way that we can. So John, thank you for facilitating today.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, this is an area that's really important to me, and I'm very passionate about it. I'd love to hear, and I know a lot of you put things in the chat box, but things that you're doing in your organization that you've seen that make a difference, I'd love to hear about it, because I kind of catalog this stuff. Shoot me an email. I'd love to hear about success you've had or things that are working.
Absolutely.
It would really be awesome.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you, everybody. It was terrific. Thanks for having me, Jim.
You bet. Always good to be with you, John. Thank you for taking the time today. Reach out if you need us. We're always here. I'm going to go ahead and end this session. We'll see you next week with an entirely new grab and go growth session. All right. Thanks, Johnny. See ya.